us woke up this morning, woke up from darkness, woke up from unconsciousness, and greeted the day. We greeted the sun, whether intentionally or otherwise. We emerged out of darkness into light. In the night, we were no one. We had left name and form behind. There was no self or other. No world was lit up around us. We delved deeply into our own innermost depths, into the great mystery. But then came dawn, then came sunrise, the sun streaming into your room, and your eyes opened to meet the sunlight. And the whole world woke up and showed itself, and you stood up and went on to undertake the work of the day. Now this insight, the manner in which the sun awakens us and reveals everything, in which the sun is the very living symbol of awakening and aliveness, this insight is powerfully expressed in a hymn that was authored by a pharaoh of ancient Egypt named Akhenaten, who lived nearly 3.5 millennia ago, in very ancient times. This hymn was engraved on a wall in his city, his imperial city near the Nile, and it has come down to us. These are some of the verses of Akhenaten, verses directed toward Aten, the light of the sun. You rest in the western horizon, and the land is in darkness, in the manner of death, sleepers in chambers, heads covered, no eye can see its other. Anything of theirs can be taken from under their heads, they would not know. Every lion goes out from its den, every snake bites. Darkness envelops, the land is in silence. Their creator is resting in his horizon. At daybreak, arisen from the horizon, shining as the disk in day, you remove the darkness, you grant your rays, and the two lands are in festival, awakened and standing on their feet. You have raised them up, their bodies cleansed, clothing on, their arms are in adoration at your sunrise. The entire land carries out its tasks. Every herd rests in its pastures. Trees and plants are sprouting, birds flying up from their nests, their wings in adoration for your spirit. Every flock frolics afoot, all that fly up and alight, they live when you have shone for them. They live when you have shone for them. Boats sail north and south too. Every road is opened at your sunrise, and the fish on the river leap at the sight of you. Your rays penetrate the great green. More than 3 millennia ago, these verses were written, but how fresh, how true. this evocation of the waking up of everything with the rising of the sun, the whole land coming to life to meet the splendor of the sun which energizes us, arouses our senses, impels us on our life's path. For Akhenaten, Aten is not the solar disk itself, but it's the light that shines through the solar disk. And Akhenaten held this creative light, this divine light, working through the sun to be the one God. He first said, no God is as great as Aten. At last he said, there is no God but Aten, no God but God. And the art of Egypt was transformed in this period, as illustrated here. We see now familial images, images of joy and tenderness, a kind of freedom and warmth of affection that was hitherto unseen. There are many views concerning Akhenaten. Some hold that he was the first monotheist. Others aver that he was the first fanatic because he destroyed the images of all other gods, or many of them. But his solar theology was not to endure, and yet its reverberations echoed down the ages. Some scholars hold that Psalm 104 carries echoes of the great hymn of Aten. Sigmund Freud went so far as to argue that the prophet Moses must have been a devotee of Akhenaten. But there's a long lapse of time between Akhenaten and the revelation of the books of Moses. We see with the rise of the Hebrew prophets and their message, the imagery of the magnificence of the sun being lifted up into a conception of God which encompasses but transcends the sun as a celestial luminary. So we read in the book of Isaiah, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. The sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory." The conception that God is the light of lights, that God is the sun of suns, that whereas people of all lands have venerated the sun as God, that the sun is indeed an instrument of that light which is eternal. It's a marvelous stanza, and you find it in the song, maybe a song known to some of you, the gospel song, "Rise and shine and give God your glory." Rise and shine and give God your glory. These words that at once evoke the brilliance of the sun and then subsume the sun within the larger, the infinite brilliance of the one being. Similarly, in the Quran Sharif, the story is told of Abraham, how, as you may know, Abraham was, as a child, was secreted in the desert because Nimrod was intent on taking his life. And so he was raised without culture or religion, but he found his own religion. And it's explained this way, that Abraham looked up into the sky and fell under the spell of the evening star. He was dazzled and he resolved to worship the evening star. But then the star set and he turned away. And then the moon appeared and he resolved he would worship the moon. But the moon disappeared. And then the sun dawned. And it was clear the sun was far greater luminary. He would worship the sun. The sun crossed the sky and set. And he turned within and he discovered all of these lights, all of the celestial bodies are all rays, as it were, are all manifestations of a light that never rises, it never sets, it never ends. He would worship this, the one who created the heavens and the earth. And this is expressed then in the light verse of the Quran in Surah Nur, in which Allah is called Nur Samawati wal Ard, the light of the heavens and earth. So in this way, the old solar theology of so many lands is sublimated, is transformed into a realization of the infinitude of a light, the light upon which all depends. And yet even so, even within the mysticism that sprang from the Quran, the sun continues to be honored as an angel of the highest order, a truly honored manifestation of the divine light. And so Sheikh al-Ishraq Shahabuddin Yahya Suhrawardi says in his great Wisdom of Illumination, Hikmat al-Ishraq, the sovereignty and power of the higher managing lights reach the spheres through the mediacy of the planets. So the managing lights are the great archangels. They reach through the planets, and in the language of antiquity, the planets means not only what we know as the planets, but also the sun and the moon. The managing lights reach the spheres through the mediacy of the planets. From their faculties, from them, their faculties go forth. And the planet is like the absolute and supreme organ. The planets are organs of the archangels. The archangels work through the planets. Huraksh, the angel of the sun, is a light of great brilliance, the maker of the day, lord of the sky, to be venerated, according to the custom of the illuminationists. So the sun is an angel. Now, if we turn to Murshid's teaching, we see how he has inherited and transmitted this age-old preoccupation with the sun as a spiritual dynamo that profoundly energizes our lives. Surawadi spoke of the Khvarena or Far, this sidereal light descending from the stars and especially from the sun, streaming down on the earth. It's constantly raining down on us. That certain human beings are able to assimilate so that it envelops them as a kind of aura and a corona that blazes around them. All of us, to some degree, partake of that sidereal light constantly descending. But the more that one witnesses it and subtly, spiritually integrates it, the more the aura burgeons. And this is depicted in iconography, going back to Mazdian iconography, the iconography of the Khvarena, that then was taken up in the iconography of Christianity and of Islam, in which you see the prophets and the imams surrounded by blazing halos of fire and light. These are all depictions of this Khvarena. So Murshid inherited and deeply experienced this transmission of illumination. It was also the way of the yogis who were in close contact with the Sufis in India to assimilate sunlight through the eyes, through the pores of the skin, oftentimes receiving sunlight via reflections shimmering on the surface of a lake. And this was a particular practice of Hazrat Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. So Murshid speaks in his teachings, in many places in his teachings about the sun. Firstly, about the physical sun. And he says, and this is especially an allusion to the elemental purification breaths, that practice that we have in which we go out of doors first thing in the morning, under the sky, and receive the all-pervading life in space. Murshid says, the sun currents have a greater healing power than anything else. A person who knows how to breathe perfectly, who is attracting sun currents into his body, can keep the body free from every kind of impurity. No microbes of destruction can exist if the sun currents can touch every part of the body which is within, and that is done by the breath. So we work with the breath, we make the breath deep and fine and subtle for a number of reasons, but a primary reason is to be able to actually assimilate the current of sunlight right into the innermost chambers of our bodies as a healing, as a renewal, as a purification. And then Murshid goes on to speak of what we would call the heliosphere. Now, this is something really worth thinking about, namely that all too often when we think of the sun, we think of it as far away, high up there, or somewhere off in space. And of course, the sun is so bright, we can't look directly into the sun, although the sun lights up everything around us. Therefore, the sun, of course, is a perfect metaphor for the divine being, who is too brilliant, too overpowering to our senses, impossible to directly perceive. And yet all of our perception depends upon the light bestowed by the One. So we think of the sun as a fiery disk that we cannot bear to look into. But the sun isn't only the disk in the sky, and the sun isn't far away, because the sun's waves reach us within 10 minutes and fill the whole solar system. And so wave after wave of sunlight is constantly pouring down through Earth's atmosphere. But in fact, it's not simply descending on the Earth. It fills the whole solar system, so that you really have to say that the Earth is moving within the heliosphere. The Earth is floating within the extended body of the sun. We're bathed in it. It's not just reaching us from far away. We're encompassed and floating within this extended body of the sun, the heliosphere. So Moshe says the part of the sun that we recognize as the sun is the center of it. But the sun is in reality as large as its light reaches. The real sun is light itself. But as there is a point which is the central focus of light, we call that point the sun. Now, you could extend the metaphor to any number of beings, including yourself, and realize you're not just what exists within the boundary of your skin. Whatever emanates from you is a field, and your life extends throughout that field, and the lives of others extend through the fields of what they emanate, through breath, through voice, through glands, through bioluminescence, through thought. In all of these ways, each of us is a kind of sun. And in fact, the very body shows this, because if you hold up your hands, you're emanating rays. Your head is a ray. All the hairs are little rays streaming out from that great ray. Your arms are 2 rays, and the fingers are streaming out. The legs are rays with the toes shooting out with sunlight. There's no denying it. And that's symbolic of radiance, which diffuses itself. It doesn't simply end at a certain point in space. Everything is like that. Everything radiates and mutually irradiates. But then Moshe goes on to elucidate something quite mysterious. I'll read this passage. What is the sun? The sun is the centralization of the all-pervading radiance. The light which was spread all around functioned in one spot. There it became more radiant, more glowing, more powerful than the radiance that was left in space. This light again functioned in the moon. Its different currents functioned in different planets and stars. This is exactly the picture of the origin of the creation. The all-pervading light of intelligence first centralized itself, thus making itself the spirit of the whole universe, and from there it began to manifest. How can we understand this? So Moshe is speaking first about an ancient primordial condition in which light was simply pervasive, you might say the implicate state. It was not yet localized. Light was everywhere at once, ubiquitously. And then Moshe speaks of a convergence, a centralization of that light. That light contracted itself, concentrated itself, and then emanated and radiated. And when it radiated, now this is something that will perhaps surprise you. He says, when it radiated from that sun from which the all-pervading light converged, the sun gave rise to the light of the moon, but also light of the planet, but also the light of the stars. Now, how can that be? How can it be said that the light of the sun of our solar system is the origin of the light of all of the stars? How can our sun be called the central sun when in fact every other star is also a sun? How can we understand what Moshe is saying here? And you have to understand that he's not speaking of the sun at the center of our solar system. He's speaking of what is called the central sun. Now, the central sun is a reality that was elucidated by the pre-Socratic philosopher Empedocles, who recognized that at the center of the earth, deep down underground, was a sun. There was a great sun in the depths of the earth, deep underground at the center of the earth. And he maintained that the sun in the sky and all of the stars and the planets were the product of the fire of that sun welling up from underground, shooting up into space and giving rise to these great luminaries. That all of the stars were the products of this one central sun. It's a profound insight. And it's an insight that has been carried over into alchemy and into Hermeticism. As in this illustration from a work of the Jesuit Hermeticist Athanasius Kircher, depicting the central fire in the middle of the planet. Now, if we understand the concept of the central sun as Moshe understands it, we don't have to think of it simply as being underground, but we think of it as being at the very base of, being at the very foundation of matter. That within the depths of matter, there is this glorious central sun, the effervescence of which gives rise to this whole cosmos and all of the stars. But still we're speaking only of the physical universe. And Moshe says there is a sun for each of the worlds, for each of the planes. There's a sun for the world of the jinn, a central sun there also, and a central sun in the angelic realm. And the central sun of the angelic realm is the very Holy Spirit from which all spirits derive. And so the soul is likened to a ray. Each of us is in our origin a ray of that spiritual sun at the center of everything. These many rays radiating out in all directions. And of course, the farther a ray proceeds, the more particularities it takes on, the more individualized it becomes. It takes on colors, it reflects, lights up the world. But it just begins with something indescribable and amorphous and ineffable, that primal spiritual sun. So Moshe says the soul is the ray of that sun, which is the infinite spirit. And if we can tune into the infinite Son of Spirit, which is the very emanation of the Godhead, if we can tune into it, it overlights our life and it guides us, it orients us. You know, the word orientation, that means turning toward the Oriens, the Latin word for the east, the place of the rising sun. To be oriented is to turn toward that horizon where new light is constantly welling up from the unseen. If we can turn toward that inner sun, we will grow in its light, we will ripen in its light. And Murshid says, as the light of the sun helps the plant to grow, so the divine spirit helps the soul towards its perfection.